And we can see how the collective West's decisions, namely by the European Union, UK, and United States, play out right now in the world economy. All it is doing, it is isolating themselves further. It is causing their economies to shrink, while nations do not trust their institutions that they have so tirelessly built and weaponized for their own gain. So now nations are pivoting towards BRICS, integrating themselves further and growing with no end in sight. Hi, everyone. My name is Benjamin Epstein. I am an economist specializing in development and policy analysis. And today I want to talk to you about some important economic news from the weekend. In our first story, I want to talk to you about Russia and its suing of Euroclear. In an article recently published by Reuters, we see that a Russian court has ordered the recovery of over 15 billion rubles. This amount of nearly 185 million US dollars would be from Belgium's Euroclear in a lawsuit filed by First Asset Management, which is formerly Russia's largest lender, Sberbank, the Vedomosti Daily reported on Friday. Now, for those who are not aware, Euroclear is a Belgium-based international clearing and settlement system. It's known for storing and settling transactions like stocks and bonds and government debt for hundreds of financial institutions around the world. But just because it is so widely available and widely used doesn't make it apolitical. Recently, another article published by Reuters showed that Euroclear was prepared to distribute over 3 billion euros. That's $3.4 billion, not to the Russian investors that they seized the money from, but to Western investors to compensate them, not to the ones that they stole from. This is just another clear example about how their coercive tactics and unilateral sanctions are not just failing in its objectives, but it is allowing countries like Russia and others to grow more resilient and also grow more robustly than using their institutions and financial architecture. Now, how will Russia respond to this? Well, we can see that aside from suing Euroclear, they will be trying to get rid of Euroclear's influence in the most emerging region in the world. Here in this article published by Tencent, we can see that Moscow is preparing a legal strike against Euroclear in the Asia-Pacific region for frozen assets. It is planned to file lawsuits in the Hong Kong courts against the management of Euroclear, which could paralyze its operations in the Asia-Pacific region. Putin is using Western legal mechanisms against Europe itself. And not only is he using it better than they ever have, but doing so and getting rid of Euroclear's influence in this area could have vast disruption to banks in Europe, but also to Euroclear as a lender, or Euroclear as a settlement system. Now, we could see here, when you compare the real GDP growth, Asia-Pacific region, it is nearly 5%. And you compare this to the European area that is barely going above 1%. The UK isn't really doing that much better, actually beating their own expectations of growing 0.7% real GDP year over year. So we could see that doing so is taking Euroclear out of a clearly emerging market is going to have vast implications for not just investors, but the institutions that the United States and the European Union have worked so hard to build up moving forward. And you would think that with all of their failed attempts to sanction Russia, to suffocate its economy, to turn the ruble into rubble, as Joe Biden so famously quoted, they would have learned. But unfortunately, we can't trust leaders in the West to learn from their countless mistakes. Recently, France and the European Union have created a new sanctions package, and it will be targeting Russia's energy, financial, and military assets and infrastructure. Now, we've seen this before, as we already know. So, why even do this again? It's not going to have the effect that they so want anyway. And all it does is that it allows other countries to see very, very clearly that the institutions that the United States and the European Union have constantly called the international rules based order, well, when they can weaponize these institutions and leverage their power and twist the rules in their favor so it can subvert the development of other countries or those that they may not agree with, all it does is it shows that these are not institutions at all. They're just mechanisms that are used by the collective West to suffocate and not allow these countries to develop and prosper. For BRICS, this is the opportunity to develop institutions that are apolitical, that do not have the influence of their nations, because at the end of the day, development is fundamental. And BRICS has the opportunity to provide that and facilitate that for decades to come. So now I want to pivot from Russia and their suit on Euroclear to a very prominent country in the Asia Pacific region, i.e. Indonesia, who is also a recent member of BRICS. In the latest economic forecasts, it was shown that Indonesia grew the second highest in the G20 nations in the first quarter of 2025. Indonesia grew 4.78% year on year, which only trailed China among the G20 nations, as well as trailing countries like Vietnam that was over 6%, said Indonesia's coordinating minister for economic affairs, Erlangga Hartarto. The most important sectors that made up the economic growth were 5 in particular: manufacturing, trade, agriculture, construction, and mining. And what is not discussed enough in this is what allowed the manufacturing, trade, agriculture, construction, and mining to grow at such a steady pace. And the reason is because of the infrastructure projects that had been in development for years from the most recent president. And so here in the most recent in the most recent report done by the Asian Development Bank, we could see that the higher spending on public infrastructure boosted their investment, where now that the buildings here have, there's been more spending towards buildings and use of machinery to boost investment, which allows the agricultural businesses to construction and mining for the necessary materials to create that growth. It integrates them all together. It allows transportation to thrive, for materials that are used in construction and mining to be used for economic growth. Now, why is that so important that they're putting so much money into infrastructure? We see China with its Belt and Road Initiative. We see that countries in the collective West, like the United States, neglect their infrastructure development. So why is it working for Indonesia as it is now? The answer is very simple. Infrastructure investment allows for robust domestic demand growth. And a different way of saying it is more roads, more bridges allows us to go to different places easier and faster, to buy things, to import things, to go to our jobs and earn more money so we can use it to fuel the economy further. And in this, again, the figure from the Asian Development Bank on the report on Indonesia, the strong domestic demand was carrying their resilient and robust growth. So we can see that Indonesia has been working on this robust domestic growth model for years before we've really seen it bear fruit now with its increase of nearly 5% that we're seeing now. And the best thing about it is that now that they are putting their money into infrastructure, the huge part of that cost is already eaten away. Now, by maintaining and upgrading their infrastructure, it'll allow their economic growth to stay robust amongst other classes and other sectors, such as someone that is living in Jakarta, the capital, or someone that's living in a more remote indigenous island, as well as carrying that growth into the long term. Now, while they are poised for this demand side economic growth, the idea of fueling, no pun intended, fueling that growth is going to depend on your sources of energy. And we could see that when you are diversifying your sources of energy, not just using coal and oil, but like China has been doing with wind and solar investment, with its new breakthroughs in thorium, with Russia's pivot to its geoeconomic strategy to diversify its energy sources, it allows you to maintain production across all different sectors and allows you to grow that much more robustly. And fortunately, there has been some recent news for Indonesia that will help with that on that front. So here in this article, most recently published, it talks about how it found two promising offshore gas fields that are really rich in protein and butane, which is used for liquefied petrol gas. And while it was located in the Java region, it will be able to produce 200 tons of gas per day, and the other one will be able to make 180 tons of gas per day. Now, with its vast abundance in natural resources and working with BRICS that has gone out of its way and has made a cornerstone to diversify your sources of energy and collaborate with other countries on how their research is allowing them to use these different sources of energy into their production, they will be able to coordinate with countries that are very specialized on this front, such as Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and other nations that will allow them to utilize the offshore gas fields that much more efficiently and better for their domestic demand. In addition, we actually have a natural source of energy that was most recently discovered, and their plans to expand upon it. So, oddly enough, Indonesia has been trying to increase bioethanol production, which can be used for producing all various kinds of things. And in a meeting that was covered by Answer News, the forestry minister Raja Juiti Antoni announced the plan to increase bioethanol production using sugar palm trees with plantations and planting over 1 million hectares in 2025. Now, for context, each hectare of the sugar palm trees can make up to 24,000 kiloliters of bioethanol. Now, while that may not be a big number in of itself, having 1.2 million hectares of this source of bioethanol production will allow them to experiment and allow it to use this as a source of energy to stabilize their production so they can keep growing and keep expanding upon their domestic base. So right now, their path is aligning with Indonesia's broader economic and environmental goals. And now, as a member of BRICS, Indonesia and other countries have an opportunity to discuss how they're using their energy for the betterment of their people and for the betterment of economic growth. So we can see that Indonesia's economic model and their strategy is already bearing fruit. The idea to invest in your domestic demand, to allow for improved infrastructure, means of transportation, ideas like agriculture to sustain your people and continue to integrate and connect all of your different sectors can make your economy that much more complex and allow it growing much more sustainably and much more robustly than what you really would see with other nations that are only prioritizing lowering costs as much as possible. And like BRICS has constantly been emphasizing, when you are diversifying your sources of energy, when you are stabilizing your means of agriculture for your people, it allows you to grow that much more robustly. And by caring for your citizens, you can prosper with no end in sight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in our discussion today. Please be sure to like and subscribe and read through the articles that we used in today's video itself. Ask questions and discuss amongst yourself what really could happen in the near future with Russia and Euroclear. Can it really take Euroclear's impact out of the Asia Pacific region? Is Indonesia really pivoted to grow robustly for decades on end? Can it really be a player not just within BRICS, but within the whole macro economy or within the whole global economy? Well, until then, thank you again for watching. And until next time, we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.